Hi everyone, I'm Neha and I'm here to talk about the topic Minimum Viable Product MVP. So, Minimum Viable Product, it's a concept from the Lean Startup. Eric Ries is defined in his Lean Startup saying that minimum viable product is a version of a new product which allows the team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about the customers with least effort. This validated learning comes in the form of whether your customers will actually purchase your product or not. So, the key concept in developing a minimum viable product is to produce an actual product that you can offer to the customers, observe their actual behavior with the product or service, seeing what the people will do with respect to the product is which more reliable than asking people on what they would like to do. So, because of the agile methodology, it is built in both the validating and integrating products based on which you get a feedback. Minimum viable product plays a central role in the agile development. So, there are three key characteristics of developing a minimum viable product. One, it's enough value the people are willing to use or buy the product or not. Number two, it demonstrates enough features benefits to retain early adapters. Number three, it provides a feedback loop to guide future development. So when you're all set ready to develop a minimal viable product, these are the three characteristics you have to keep in your mind. So setting a minimum viable product is nothing but setting a prototype with a set of hypotheses when you actually step out of your doorstep to go develop a new product into the market. Instead of launching a new product directly into the market, it's always advisable as a startup to come up with a minimum viable product which will help you to know the customer's feedback, retain their feedbacks, adapt the feedbacks, take the changes, take the inputs from the customers, adapt your product according to the changes, and come up with a product which will actually give you a long run in the market. So, how do you develop a minimum viable product? So, when you're ready to launch a minimum viable product, there are few strategies or steps which you have to always keep in mind. So, the first step is make sure your minimum viable product is meeting your business objectives. Always define the steps or objectives what your business plan is looking for or the product you're planning to launch into the market. Never deviate from the concept of what your product or the launch is about the product. Never deviate from the concept of what is the specific area you're targeting with your product. So the first point in developing a minimum viable product is to make sure that your MVP is meeting your business objectives. Once you're sure that your MVP is meeting your business objectives, then come up with identifying specific problems you want to solve with your product releasing into the market. Now that you have determined the business objectives with your MVP and you've started thinking about solving the specific problems that a customer might want to get resolved with the usage of this product, you have to have the following factors including in your MVP. They should be the user research, competitive analysis, how quick you will be able to get certain types of functionalities when you receive a feedback, and the relative cost to implement the various user tips or stories you get from the market. Now, after you're done solving the problems or focusing on the problem solutions, now you have to translate your MVP into a functional plan of action. So, the most important point while developing an MVP is the V of MVP, that is the viable. The letter viable, which stands for V of MVP. This means it must always allow the customers to complete an entire task of your project rather than giving them a high quality of user experience. Make them MVP cannot be a user interference, but it has to provide a very good user experience. So the key contributions or the attributes developing an MVP are can be an MVP is not an MVP until it sells. It has to be a ready type to sell in the market. It should not be a product with lesser functionalities or a set of hypotheses. Rather, it has to be a complete product which is ready to launch into the market. MVP is more about process, not about the product. And MVP is not the product with minimum number of elements, but it has to have all the core efficient features you want to have in your product. So there are some distinct features of MVP. So those are, once it is ready that you're launching a product with the minimum viable uh, planning, you have to have the features for the consumer to purchase the product. The other is that you'll have some sort of feedback mechanism wherein the users will be able to send their feedback about your product. And lastly, it should have enough features benefiting for customers who adapt the product first. So the idea to get a feedback from the consumer is will in turn help you in making decision to the change in the final product. This in a way will reduce the cost of investment, also will reduce any further changes in your product rather than developing a product and releasing it in the market and losing all your 6 months or 8 months of effort in developing a product where there is a negative feedback from customer. The safer side of MVP is that it will give you a feedback in this stage wherein you avoid that 6 to 8 months of time wastage and financial investment wastage, because you get a proper feedback, and it's always better to work according to the feedback on to the final product. So how do you test an MVP? Testing is the most important phase of MVP. So, minimum viable products testing is the essence. An MVP is seeking a test whether an idea is working in the market environments while using the least possible expenditures. A simple method to test is the financial viability and the idea of how your discovery driven planning is working in the market. So, results from this minimum viable product test are aimed to identify is the product able to build what you have planned in the market. Testing evaluates initial problems or goals is solved in a manner of a reasonable to move forward. So the technique that helped them in making a final product is much better. With the help of the concept MVP, the research or the market team will come up to know where the product is lacking and what are the strengths or weakness of the product, and the final product will be developed according to these steps which we have followed in the stage of testing. So every product will be having some sort of uh, advantages and disadvantages. I would like to discuss about few benefits of using the concept minimum viable product for every startup. So the primary benefit of MVP is to gain understanding about your customers, interest in your product with the fully developing the product. The sooner you can find out that your product is appealing to the customers or the early adapters of the customers, the less effort or the less expenses you spend on the product, and that will be succeeded in the market. You have to be able to test a prototype with a minimal resource, accelerate learning, reduce wastage engineering hours, and also to get the produce to the early customers as soon as possible. Bear for the other investments on the product to establish the builder's abilities in creating the product required, and the brand building is very quickly done with is one of the benefits of utilizing the concept of minimal viable product. At the same time, on the contrary, we also have few pitfalls with the concept of minimal viable product. So the team stresses on the part of the minimum viable feature of the market to exclusion of the marketable part. The product delivery is not sufficient equal quality to generate the possible returns and had been built appropriate at the level of the quality. This can be one drawback of using the concept of MVP. MVP will also consider when there are no further changes done to the product, regardless of the feedback you receive from the consumers. Additionally, you adding or what all you want to add, keeping in mind of your business objectives, then MVP is going to be a failure. It also indicates that a negative feedback on your MVP can affect the company's reputation. Many developers, such as mobiles, digital electronic gadgets, etc., products, are now utilizing the concept of MVP because the customers can easily switch between competitors and the products through platforms such as app stores, online stores, etc. So, a notable limitation of MVP is that this approach that seeks out to test their ideas to the market, because there are benefits and disadvantages of the product. It's always advisable to as a startup, it is always advisable to have a minimum viable product, and every concept will anyways have their contrary side effects or pitfalls of a product developed. I would also like to discuss few examples of startups which have used minimum viable product and how success they are doing today in the market. One good example I would like to talk in a real time, which I have experienced too, is the Airbnb. I guess we all know about the concept of Airbnb. Initially, when the concept of Airbnb was there into market, with no money to start up a business, the founders of Airbnb has used their own apartment to validate the idea and create market offering a short term or a rental house on rent kind of concept, and this was launched online with their own house. They created a minimalistic website and they published few photos. They've added few tiny details about their properties, and they've also came up with certain rules and regulations to follow when they're using the property. And they found out that several people are paying guests almost started looking for the property and had a positive response on their property immediately. Now this is how they use the concept of MVP to start a concept of Airbnb, and this led to the launch of the most happening concept startup business today is Airbnb. At the same time, Virgin Airlines did the same. It is one of the biggest British airlines operating internationally, and this was owned by Richard Branson. What he done was he used the concept of minimum viable product for his Virgin Airlines. It was just one route and one plane flying between two places, and using the concept of minimum viable product, he used only one route and with only one plane of his. And if I'm not wrong, he was using this between the routes of Gatwick and Newark. So with the response he got on the frequent flyers of this route with one flight, he started up coming up with a great idea of Virgin Airlines. And also some other examples such as Facebook, Dropbox, Groupon, Zappos, etc. also used minimum viable product in their startup stage to know the market value of their business objectives and are successfully running their products happily in the market. So I personally, with my research on minimum viable product, would definitely suggest any startup to use the concept of MVP for a better and a successful business outside in the business market. Thank you.